Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. I'm Callie, and today I'm going to be going over all of the books that I have recently read. So I have a fair amount to get through, so I'm just going to jump right in. The first book I'm going to talk about is My Lady Jane by the Lady Janies, which consists of Cynthia Hand, Brodi Ashton, and Jodi Meadows. This is a historical fantasy fiction type of story. They have written 3 Lady Janie books, the last one coming out this June, and I'd heard really good things about these, and this was the first one that has come out, and it was the first one that I wanted to pick up because this follows Lady Jane Grey, who was queen for 9 days after King Edward, the only son of King Henry VIII, died at a young age. This was his way to circumvent one of his sisters becoming queen, so he anointed Jane Grey. So this follows an alternate history of Jane becoming queen, those 9 days, and what happened after. So if you know anything about history, Jane Grey was executed after those 9 days by Queen Mary. But this took that story and added magic, which introduced a very interesting dynamic. So it was fun, imaginative. The magic was a little bit confusing at first because it was almost just like a general shape-shifting kind of magic. But there were certain conditions that had to come with that shape-shifting. I thought this was a perfect book that just is escapism. It was just this weird, kooky world. The authors broke the fourth wall a ton, which was really fun. The first half of the book were like, hey, this is like kind of actually what happened in history. And then we get halfway through the book and they're like, yeah, this didn't happen. This was all us. And it was so cute. And I loved the way that you couldn't tell that it was 3 people working on this story. It flowed really nicely. The writing was so much fun. And it was just, I thought it was a great way for the authors to communicate with the reader. I ended up giving this book 4 stars just because it was a fun, quick read, and even though Jane Grey's story is really sad, this one was a very happy-go-lucky kind of story. Next, I picked up one of my rereads, which was Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. I still think that this is my favorite book in the entire series. I just think this one almost just builds up to our general plot that happens later. This is the building blocks of what needs to happen in the next couple of books. And I love Aylin in this story. She is badass. She is there to take names. She's just, and she pops up out of nowhere just to piss people off, and it's hysterical. The banter in this is hilarious, and I love it. I flew through this reread just because I just love this story, and I'm so glad that I'm rereading it. The next book that I ended up picking up was The Merciful Crow by Margaret Owen. This one had a very interesting system. So this story follows Fi, who is a part of the Crow cast. This world is built into different castes, the Crows being the lowest. So all the other castes are affected by this plague, and the reason the Crows are the lowest is they're the only ones that are immune. So the thought process in this world is that you've done something so bad that you now have to deal with the dead in this new life. Follow Fi, who is in the Crow cast, and she ends up teaming up with someone from the highest class, the Phoenix class, which is the royalty, and we sort of follow her story and we kind of get integrated into this world. I love the way that the different bird castes work because each one correlated with a different type of magic, which I thought was really neat. So the Phoenix cast, they had fire magic, there was like a scouting magic, there was an invisible magic, there were different types. It was a little confusing at first because they were just like, oh, I'm using sparrow magic, and I'd have to try and remember what sparrow magic was. I did find this book a tad bit predictable. Fi was that really annoying main character who typically with these characters, I tend to get attached to them by the end, and I didn't care for Fi at all. I didn't like her, and I don't know what it was. I ended up liking the 2 other, the Hawk class and the Phoenix class characters more. They were more entertaining, and I thought they just had more value to the story. Another thing, I didn't super like the teeth magic, which was the magic of the Crows. They can use teeth from other castes to use as magic and steal their magic through the teeth. It was weird and creepy, and it kind of rubbed me the wrong way, and I didn't super care for it. And that's kind of what made it hard to follow, is she was like, oh, I have a tooth. It's a hawk tooth, and I'm going to use hawk magic, but I can only use it for so much because I only have one tooth. It was weird. It wasn't explained very well, in my opinion, so I had to keep flipping back and forth to figure out what kind of magic was it, what did that magic do, and whatnot. So I gave this book 3 stars. It has potential. I know there's a sequel, so I'm interested to see if that sequel can fulfill that potential. After that, I picked up our Serpent and Badger book club pick, which was Zodiac by Romina Russell. This follows a world, not even a world, a solar system based off of the Zodiac. Each planet is a zodiac sign, and each one of those planets has its own subsect of magic and political hierarchy, which was really interesting and I think very exquisitely set up. It was very imaginative. So we follow a girl from Cancer who has found herself now the leader of this world because she has the strongest sight into the zodiac, which unfortunately comes with her seeing the doom and the 13th sign that is fabled. No one believes in this 13th sign. It is said to be a children's tale, so nobody believes her. So she is running around the entire solar system trying to figure out and convince everybody else that the 13th sign is real. I did find the writing in this book to be a bit juvenile. It was very obvious as to what was happening. It was predictable, but it showed a lot of promise, and I have high hopes for the rest of this series. It is a 4-book long series because I think a lot of things were set, like I said, a lot of things were set up really well. The organization of the Zodiac and correlating magic was very intriguing, and I really liked it. I think the story benefited a lot from being in space. I don't think this would have worked in a generic fantasy setting because when you think of the Zodiac, you think of the stars, and I don't know, I think of futuristic. When I saw this cover, I automatically thought it was going to be futuristic. I think that worked really well with the upcoming technology, how that worked with some of the magics, with the magic system, and how our main characters were able to navigate through the stars and be able to visit all of the other different planets so quickly. I think it was very well done, and I have high hopes for the rest of the series, so I give this book 3 stars. The next book I picked up is Crown of Coral and Pearl by Rutherford. This follows twin sisters, and they live on this island compound where every generation the most beautiful girl is chosen. Noor and her sister Zadie were favored to win when they were young, but then Noor ended up getting a scar on her cheek, and so Zadie is in the running. However, after a horrific accident, Zadie is injured, and Noor, being her twin sister, goes in her place to the mainland, to this cruel prince. So she is trying her best to maneuver her way through politics to try and save her islands because the mainland is taking advantage of their coral and their pearls. And I think that relationship between the coral and the pearl was really cool and a very interesting dynamic that I'd never seen before in a seafaring story. This was a very atmospheric story as well. So we are in 2 different locations. We're on this little collection of small islands, which is Noor and Zadie's home, and we're also on the mainland, but it is very coastal mainland. But the stark differences between the two, where the islands are warm and coastal and the mainland is so cold, and even like they're not all that far from the coast, it's cold and the mountain is jagged and there's darkness opposed to the bright sun. I thought that atmosphere was built up so spectacularly. I did also really like the focus on platonic friendships and siblings in this story opposed to our love story. There is a small love plot line, but it's not the main focus. Our main focus is more on the sibling relationships and platonic friendships that are built. And then we have our evil prince guy. Overall, I gave this book 4 stars. I thought it was really well done, and I'm really excited to see where this is going to go after how this book ended. The next book that I ended up picking up was Children of Virtue and Vengeance by Adeyemi. This is the sequel to The Children of Blood and Bone, And this was a highly anticipated sequel. It kept getting pushed. It was supposed to come out like last June, and it ended up coming out in December. So I've been highly anticipating this because I really enjoyed the first book. So we follow Zelie, who has the signs of magic, but when she was a child, magic was just disappeared. She is an Orisha, which is shown by the white hair. They have been persecuted ever since magic disappeared. So we follow Zelie on her mission to try and bring magic back to the realm. As well as she's on the run from the prince, who is basically like an Orisha hunter who was hiding magic. It is a very dynamic and diverse story. I loved the magic system. We've got reapers, we have people who control light, we have healers, oracles, the connectors are one of my favorite as well. It's just overall just such an intriguing magic system and world. However, I gave the first book 5 stars. This one I only gave 3 because this one was all talk. It was all battle planning and planning and planning and planning. There was very little action. And what action there was, it was upsetting. It was just a lot of like interfighting and internal conflicts that just were very annoying because it was a lot of miscommunication and not saying enough and not communicating correctly, and I find that very agitating as a reader. So I did find this to be a bit dull, and I was not the biggest fan of this sequel. I think this one suffers from sequel syndrome pretty badly. I am interested. The last like 10 pages convinced me to stick this series out because it was just such a sudden thing that happened. So I am pretty excited for, I think this is going to end up being a trilogy. I'm not entirely positive, but this book did suffer a bit and it wasn't as entertaining as I found the first one. The next book I ended up picking up was my biggest anticipated read of the entire year, House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. I really love Sarah J. Maas's writing. She's one of my favorite authors. So this is her debut adult book, which follows Bryce, who her best friend is murdered, and the murder ends up going unsolved for a couple of years, but then similar murders start happening, and she has to team up with a fallen angel named Hunt, who is trying to earn his freedom by solving these murders and teaming up with Bryce. So we follow them on this murder mystery, but in this dynamic world. This world is basically like all of Sarah J. Maas's world. We have fae, we have shapeshifters, all kinds of different things, but with modern technology. So they have cell phones and they have ways to communicate with people. It was such an interesting world and it was just fascinating. I ended up giving this 4.5 stars because it was extremely slow. There's so much info dumping in this book. It was a lot. It was a lot to take in. I was reading it very slowly and rereading some stuff just so I made sure that I understood what was happening in the world. But our characters were phenomenal. Bryce and Hunt, our main 2 characters, their banter was hysterical and just so much fun to read. I love how Sarah J. Maas, since this is her debut adult novel, she put in all the swear words that she couldn't in her young adult books, which was so funny because there was so much swearing in this. I think that Sarah J. Maas is the queen of being able to shock you. The last 300 pages, I could not put this book down because of the shock factor. There was so much happening, so much I wasn't ready for at all. And it was just so phenomenally written. I love it. She knows how to shock you. She knows that misdirection that authors are really good at. The red herrings were real. There were so many things that I just wasn't expecting from this and that I got. And I'm just ready for more of this series. Next, I picked up The Toll by Neal Shusterman, which is the final book in the Arc of the Scythe trilogy. So the Arc of the Scythe trilogy follows a utopian world where man has defeated death. We are immortal and there are no more diseases, no more poverty, no more anything. Everything is great. Technology is wonderful. The world is run by the cloud. It's great. However, there's population control issues. So they decided that the humans would create this group of people called scythes who would glean people to control population. And these scythes use different means. There are some that use statistics. There are some that just do big gleanings, several people at once. There are different ways to glean. So we follow Citra and Rowan as they are scythe apprentices in learning the art, as also learning the corruption that is in the scythe universe, and it shows a lot about how human error is real. Because everything is run by, it's called the Thunderhead. Everything is run by the Thunderhead, and the Thunderhead does not make mistakes. Humans do. And it showed that really well. I think this also showed a little bit into like our apocalyptic future, which was very interesting to read about. This whole world was phenomenal. The characters were so great. I do think this was a really good way to end the story. It was a bit long, but at the same time, I understand why it had to be long, because there are certain things that needed to happen in order for us to get to that ending. So there are things that he left out in the previous books that needed to be addressed in this one, which made sense to me. I also really liked how there were different timelines. So if you know how Thunderhead ended, we do have a bit of time jumping back and forth. I didn't find that confusing at all. I was able to easily pinpoint where we were in the timeline. And then when we converged, it was even easier to understand what was happening. So I really enjoyed this series. I think this series overall, I gave this book 4 stars. The series overall, I'd give 4 or 4.5 stars. I think it was such a well done and such a unique story, and I highly recommend you read it. And now you can read the entire series because they're all out. The next book that I picked up was Hidden Bodies, which I ended up DNFing, which is did not finish. I gave up on this book about 50 pages in because this sequel, which is the sequel to You, which is what the popular Netflix show is based off of, this was completely different from book 1. Our point of view changed. The first book was written in second person, which was a very unique take. I also felt like our main character, who you're supposed to almost feel sympathy for half the time, just became this big bad villain, and I didn't care for it. I didn't care for how the story was going. I didn't care for where it was going to go. And so I just DNF'd it because I wasn't going to finish it. I was trudging along and just kept losing focus on it. So I decided that this was going to be a DNF. After that book, I actually got a book delivered to my house, and that was Imagine Me by Tahereh Mafi, which is the final book in the Shatter Me series, which is a post-apocalyptic story, basically where people have started to show powers. So we follow Juliet, who has the power to kill with just a touch. So kind of think Rogue from X-Men. She is stuck in a dungeon for little under a year and hasn't touched a single human being in more than 2 years, I believe is what it was. So this is book 6, so that was a little bit ago, but I won't give any spoilers to the previous books. I love Juliet's story. I think this was such a well done story. I think it showcased depression and a lot of other mental illnesses very well, especially for how Juliet is as a character. One thing that I really loved about this series is you're in Juliet's mind. Now, a lot of books are in that first person where you're basically in that character's mind and body. But the way her mind works is, and the way that Tahereh Mafi wrote the story was, if she has a thought, it's like, oh, I shouldn't think that, it was crossed out. It was crossed off enough where you could still read what was happening, but you also got that unspoken understanding that she didn't want to think that, but she actually did. I thought that was a beautiful way to portray anxiety and depression. And it was just overall really well done. I love the twists and turns that she even gave us in this last book that I was super not ready for. The only issue is that the last bit was very rushed. I don't feel like I got exactly what I was looking for in this finale. A lot of people have been waiting a long time for this finale. I only found this series a year ago, so I didn't have to wait as long, but it just wasn't as fulfilling as I anticipated. There was also a character who I think got super shafted in this entire series, and just sort of like, oh crap, we forgot about him kind of a thing, which I think is kind of a bummer because I was really hoping that he would get a really good character arc or something. He got nothing, and I was kind of sad about it. Overall, I gave this 4 stars, and the series itself I would also give 4 stars. I think it is very well done. It is unique, even though post-apocalyptic stories are pretty common. I think the way that this is written and portrayed is extremely unique, and even the story itself, as you progress along through all 6 books, just gets more and more surprising and shocking, and I love this series. And then the next book I picked up was another reread, and that was Empire of Storms by Sarah J. Maas. Just me trudging along through my Throne of Glass reread. this book hurts me every time I read it. The last like 4 chapters hurt me to my core, and I still just get weepy when I read it because just so many bad things happen that were built up from Queen of Shadows in this book. Things start to come extremely full circle in Empire of Storms, where you just learn that Aelin is a shady bitch and has so many plans that you had no idea were happening, and just you see things from book 1 tie into book 5, and even in Kingdom of Ash, things get tied back, and it's phenomenally done. And just that Sarah J. Maas is just the queen of twists and turns and shocking me, sometimes it hurts me. Exhibit A. And the last book that I ended up finishing for this recent reads is Things in Jars by Jess Kidd. So this is a historical fantasy mystery story. It was very strange writing. So we follow this woman who secretly works for Scotland Yard on odds and ends mysteries that the police can't figure out. So she's told about this missing child who is potentially a mermaid. And she is whisked into this world of people who collected, which was a huge thing, the carnivals that collected people. So we get into this weird collector's world, as well as trying to find this child. And she starts seeing a ghost who she can communicate with and helps her out, and the ghost is there for her, and she has to figure out why this ghost is following her and why no one else can see him, and why her specifically. I gave this book three stars. It did have a really cool mermaid mystery that was fun to follow, but the ending was extremely rushed and not at all satisfying. I had to reread it. It was literally in like 2 pages. So I had to like reread those 2 pages and be like, did that actually just happen? That's it? And I don't think I meshed really well with the writing style. I found it very confusing and oddly descriptive, overly descriptive on certain parts and not descriptive enough on others. So I just don't think I meshed with this writing style. But overall, it was a solid mystery. I was intrigued the entire time as to the mermaid aspect, the carnival aspect, the people collecting aspect. There were so many different aspects that were so well done, but I just think that like the writing was so off and didn't go well enough with it. And those are all the books that I have read. I've read a fair amount, mainly because I am home most of my day now due to COVID-19. So stay safe. That's going to be it for today. So feel free to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We are still posting videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. All of our links and everything will be listed down below. So go ahead and check any of those out. Our Goodreads, Instagram, and Sarah and mine's blog. And I will see you guys in our next video. Bye!